Hello, everyone. This is Fox 12 Now. I'm Greg Nibbler. I appreciate you all joining us. I am showing you this right now because that is Portland Union Station right there in downtown Portland, a 128-year-old building owned by the city of Portland, managed by Prosper Portland, and that's what the topic of conversation is going to be today. And again, this is Fox 12 Now, so thank you for being a part of the show. We are live streaming here every weekday from the Fox 12 Oregon newsroom. You can find us on YouTube, kptv.com, and of course on the Fox 12 Oregon apps. Now, Union Station is for sale. This is something that the city of Portland, that Prosper Portland has announced. And with that, there is the caveat that there are a number of renovations and improvements that need to happen, and they're pretty pricey. So even in this interview, I start off saying $200 million. It really gets higher than that. And so when you think about hundreds of millions of dollars of improvements, what could those possibly be? What costs that much? Well, that's what we wanted to find out. So we went down to Union Station. We spoke to Shawn from Prosper Portland, who again is the group managing this site. We'll find out more about that organization as well, and just what really goes into that dollar amount and why it could go even higher. Who could the potential buyers be? We ask all of those questions during this interview. So let's go ahead and run this now, and then we're going to come back and maybe answer a couple other questions here that you may have even after this. But let's talk to Shawn down there at Union Station. Just for a quick history of it, how old is Union Station?
So Union Station is 128 years old, so it is one of the oldest stations in the system that is currently in operation throughout the United States.
Wow, so that's interesting in its own right. So this has been around for that long, and now during that time, how many times has it been upgraded or changes to it, like major changes?
So the last major renovation was in the 1930s, so it's been decades and decades since it's had a major renovation. Now, since Prosper Portland has owned it in the mid to late 80s, we've done upkeep and maintenance and things like that. There was a re-roof project that took place, but for the most part, we haven't had the resources to do what's needed as far as a major renovation to the facility and the tracks.
And Prosper Portland's, can you give everybody an understanding of what Prosper Portland is?
Sure. Prosper Portland is the City of Portland's economic development agency. So we do a lot of redevelopment work. We work with small businesses throughout the city, and specifically in what we call TIF districts, which are tax increment finance areas. So you'll see a lot of our work in various parts of town. The Pearl District is one such area, and again, that's partly how we came to acquire the station.
Okay, yeah, so Prosper Portland is technically the owner of Union Station here.
Correct. So we purchased Union Station in 1987 as part of an acquisition of 31 acres. The majority of that land has become what we know as the Pearl District, and essentially the Union Station property was part of that original transaction, and we've continued that, maintained that ownership ever since that time.
Okay, so that's interesting. So that's all part of that Pearl District planning that went into that.
Correct. So when we originally purchased that 31 acres, this was part of that, and as you've seen over the decades, those properties have been redeveloped. We've seen obviously housing and hotels and other offices and things like that emerge, and the station has remained sort of the fixture of the area.
So when we see the news about Prosper Portland wanting to sell Union Station, there's that aspect, I guess, of why you want to sell it, but also a $200 million, I noticed, was part of this as well. And I think, the question is, what's the $200 million for? Where does that go?
Sure. So I think there's a couple of things there. First of all, as the city's economic development agency, we are not the best entity to do a major renovation of a transportation hub, which is what this really is. This is an essential piece of the transportation system, particularly running up and down the west coast of the United States. So having an economic development agency in charge of it it doesn't really align. And I think when we talk about the cost that we're really looking at here, it's at least $250 million in renovation that's needed. And that cost will probably go up as those designs are refined and we get a clearer sense of what needs to be done. I think the current estimate is probably conservative, and we would probably see that number increase maybe to $300 million or more once all is said and done.
Wow. So going up to that price, I mean, $300 million, what are the things that we're talking about as far as those upgrades?
Sure. So I think the majority of the upgrades, probably 2/3 of those costs, are really with the track and the facility itself when it comes to the transportation aspect, platforms, the canopies, the track alignment, really like the infrastructure infrastructure of the facility itself, and frankly, what it's designed to do is be a rail facility. And so those improvements are the lion's share of the costs. In addition, you're looking at upgrades to the facility itself. So this is an old brick building. It's unreinforced masonry. That needs to be addressed. The systems in the building, plumbing, electrical, mechanical, those do as well. But those costs are relatively small compared to what we're talking about with the track itself.
So that track, that's an expensive upgrade.
That's a significant upgrade in cost. Now, when you talk about what it will mean at the other end, though, that's where I think the real benefit is to the traveling public and the folks who ride on the train. They'll see that benefit in quicker times in and out of the station, from what we understand.
Well, so when you look at some of the increased transportation that's expected to happen with Amtrak having more trains running through here, Portland, Seattle, and beyond that, how is that going to be feasible right now with where we're at with Union Station, or is that something that's necessary with these upgrades?
I think the upgrades are a key part of it. Obviously,
Yeah.
Amtrak could speak more eloquently probably to,
Right.
to the actual flow of traffic in and out. But what we can tell you is that it's long been identified by all parties that these upgrades are necessary in order for the in order for the train station to continue to be a viable in operation.
Well, when we look at 250, maybe $300 million, and that's for the sale, I'm assuming, or is that just for the renovations?
Those are the upgrade costs that we would be looking at. So I think anything, when we talk about actual transaction,
Yeah.
we would enter into agreement with an entity, again, like Amtrak, somebody with Federal Rail, somebody with ODOT, really a transportation-focused entity is who we want to work with. And all those costs that we are anticipating would be in the $250, $300 million range would be part of that transaction. So it's much more about ensuring that an entity that is capable of making those improvements is in charge of the facility and able to make them. It's not so much about a sale, if you will. It's much more about this transfer, this transaction occurring with the intent that those upgrades, those required necessary upgrades are made.
Got it. So that would be part of that transfer.
Absolutely.
These are the upgrades that need to be done. Here's
Yes.
what it is, the estimate. Now, talking about, going back to what you were just mentioning there as far as who would take ownership, who would take over, what are the entities that are even viable to do that? I mean, there's Amtrak certainly, but who else would be there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what we're looking at primarily is that a transportation-focused entity, and given Amtrak's focus on rail transportation, that's sort of a logical partnership. We've been in discussions as a city and as Prosper Portland with Amtrak, with the Oregon Department of Transportation, and with state and federal delegation representatives for a number of years on this. And so everyone's aware of the desire, and I think everyone's interested in seeing that relationship continue, if you will. Now, Amtrak has said, due to budget issues and a number of other things, that they've stepped away for now, but that doesn't mean the conversation stops. So I think it's going to continue to be a topic that we're going to pursue, and that's something that we're all interested in seeing happen ultimately. Because given this rail station's importance, again, what we want to see is somebody who's focused on transportation being in charge of those improvements.
And Amtrak being the one that, obviously somebody that, as you mentioned, you've been talking to. So looking at that, as far as when we're talking about a timeline, they're stepping away. How important is it to have these renovations done in the meantime while we're still waiting for somebody to take ownership?
There's not a real urgency in seeing
Okay.
this sale come to fruition on any certain timeline. It's much more about what we will continue to do, which is what Prosper Portland has done since the late 80s, which is maintain the station. We have an operating budget that annually spends money on upgrades and needed things that have to be done. The larger renovation cost that we're talking about is not something that we're in a position to fund or manage, frankly. So we'll continue to do the operation, we'll continue the conversations with our partners, and hopefully get to a point where we are able to transfer ownership of the asset. But for the time being, we'll continue to maintain and do what's required.
So the building's not going to fall down right now.
Correct.
We're still going to have trains coming through.
Absolutely.
This is more of a longer term issue where all of these things need to be addressed.
Absolutely. I think that there's the shorter term operation and maintenance of the facility. That is something that Prosper Portland will continue to maintain. There are small businesses that have set up shop here, and again, of course, Amtrak being the largest tenant in the building. So all of that operation will continue as it always has. And then again, longer term, we'll look at hopefully transferring to a partner who can make those renovations happen.
All right, so again, huge thank you to Shawn there from Prosper Portland for having us out to take a look at that. Now, we did follow up a little bit more, and Shawn was able to share with us some of the renderings of what could possibly happen with some of that money. Again, this isn't a concrete plan, but this is just taking a look at proposed renovations. Maybe a little difficult for you to see on here, but I'm going to pull these up anyway. This is looking at the existing and proposed platform and track cross sections. So that's part of what he mentioned, is that is where they believe the bulk of that money will be going. And if you're talking about 250, 300 million, he believed around 2/3 of that would be going towards those. If you take a look here, Again, this is a little difficult to see everything, but there is an auxiliary, kind of an auxiliary station that's down there in the bottom. Looks like that's going to be someplace else where maybe passengers would be. I don't know for sure, but something extended down there. You've got expanded railways over there, all part of what he was brought up in there as he's building improvements. And then you have this. So this, again, was where going to that, talking about those funds, this is where it seems like the main bulk of that money and renovations would go. These are the exterior perspectives there, looking out there for the tracks and just some of that different changes. Looks like more covering, I'm sure updated rails, a lot of the stuff that he went into. But we appreciate getting just an idea of where that would be. We won't know that this is exactly what's going to be happening until they have a buyer, until really further down the line. But taking a look at proposed renovations when it comes down to it. So that is where we're at. How do you feel about that? You can leave a comment, of course, on our YouTube channel, and you can share this segment from there or from kptv.com or via the Fox 12 Oregon app. That's also where these live. If you have questions about this that we didn't get answered, please feel free to send me an email, fox12now@kptv.com. I'll see if I can get to the bottom of it. But as we know right now, that's where we're at. That is what the prices are. There is no buyer particularly lined up. Amtrak has stepped away from negotiations. Doesn't mean that they can't come back, but they are looking at other parties as well. But know that for the question that people are wondering about, does that mean it can be torn down or anything like that? No, that is not what that means. It just means that it's an old building and it needs some upgrades in order to keep being viable going forward here after a few years. So that's where we're at. Thank you very much for joining us. I do appreciate it. I'm Greg Nibbler. This is Fox 12 Now.